I never thought the quiet knock on my door that evening would change everything. It was the kind of knock that didn't demand attention but begged for it, soft, shaky, almost fearful. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor or someone who needed directions. But the moment I opened the door and saw my younger sister standing there, everything inside me stopped. Her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes swollen from crying, and she kept one arm wrapped tightly around herself like she was holding her whole body together. She didn't say a word. She just looked up at me with this expression, a mix of exhaustion, shame, and something that felt dangerously close to hopelessness. And instantly, I knew something was terribly wrong. She stepped inside slowly, almost as if she was afraid someone had followed her. I remember trying to ask what happened, but my words felt frozen in my throat. She took a deep breath, opened her mouth like she wanted to speak, but then she looked away. Her hands trembled. I had seen my sister upset before, stressed before, even heartbroken before, but never like this. This was different. This was fear. As she stood there, I noticed faint marks along her neck and the way her sleeves were pulled down too far, almost like she was trying to hide something. She wasn't physically collapsing, but she looked like someone who had been emotionally worn down piece by piece. And in that moment, I realized that the girl who used to be full of laughter and bright energy was now carrying silence like a weight she could barely hold. I gently asked her if she was hurt, but she shook her head quickly, not in denial, but in that way someone does when they're afraid that acknowledging something will make it worse. She kept glancing back at the front door as if expecting it to burst open. It was the first time I had ever seen her look like she didn't feel safe, even inside my home. She finally whispered my name, her voice barely audible. It cracked halfway through, like speaking at all was painful. She said she needed a place to stay just for the night. Of course I told her she could stay as long as she needed, but what she said next made my stomach twist. "I didn't want to come here," she murmured, eyes glossy. "But I didn't have anywhere else to go." I felt a chill run down my spine. My sister and I hadn't always been extremely close, but she had never spoken like that before. The way she said it, so defeated, so unsure, made me realize she had been dealing with something for a long time without telling me. Something big. Something she shouldn't have been facing alone. Her husband's family flashed through my mind. They always had a strange energy around them, controlling, overbearing, overly traditional in ways that didn't sit right with me. From the beginning, I noticed how they often spoke for her, interrupted her, dismissed her ideas, and brushed aside her feelings. My sister always insisted it was nothing, that she was still adjusting, that she wanted to make peace with them. But even then, something in her tone told me she wasn't fully convinced. Now, with her standing in my living room, the truth felt much closer, and much darker. I guided her to sit on the couch. She winced slightly when she leaned back, and that tiny flinch felt like someone had punched me directly in the chest. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything inside me was screaming that something was deeply wrong. She avoided my eyes, staring at the floor like she was afraid of my reaction, afraid of judgment, afraid of being questioned. I brought her water, sat next to her, and waited. I wanted her to talk on her own terms. For a long while, she didn't say anything at all. She just stared at the cup in her hands, turning it slowly like she needed something to hold on to. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, tense, filled with all the things she couldn't yet bring herself to explain. Finally, she whispered, "They wouldn't stop." Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. She didn't give details, didn't describe anything explicitly, but her tone alone told me enough. She spoke about constant pressure, about being blamed for things she didn't do, about being treated like she didn't belong. She said every day in that house felt like walking on thin ice, never knowing when it would crack under her feet. She told me she tried everything to keep the peace. She tried being quiet, being respectful, being patient. She tried communicating, tried staying strong, tried convincing herself it was just the stress of marriage or misunderstandings that would eventually fade. But nothing changed. In fact, it only got worse. Her voice shook as she described how isolated she felt. How her husband rarely stepped in, afraid to oppose his family. How she began to feel like an outsider in her own home, like she didn't deserve happiness, like she was the problem. Her words came out slowly, as if she had spent months trying to swallow them until she couldn't anymore. And then she said something that made my eyes sting with anger and sadness. "I thought, if I stayed any longer, I would lose myself." Hearing that broke something inside me. No one should ever feel that way, not my sister, not anyone. I wanted to hug her, to tell her she was safe now, that she wasn't alone anymore. But I also knew she wasn't ready for too much comfort. Sometimes, when someone has been hurting silently for too long, even kindness can feel overwhelming. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "Please, Don't tell anyone I'm here yet. Not even Mom. Not him. Not anyone. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. I nodded. I didn't know the full story yet, but I knew enough to understand that whatever she had escaped from wasn't just stress or misunderstanding, it was something that had pushed her to her limit. But before I could ask anything else, she looked at me with a kind of fear I had never seen in her eyes before. She took a deep breath, hesitated, and then said in a trembling voice, "They're going to come looking for me." And right then the doorbell rang. When the doorbell rang, my sister froze. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the couch, and her breathing quickened just a little, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. I felt the tension climb up my back like a warning. The timing was too perfect, too sudden. It couldn't be them, right? Still, the fear in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't ready for any surprises. I told her to stay where she was and walked toward the door as quietly as possible. Every step felt slow, heavy, cautious. My mind raced through every possibility. Maybe it was just a neighbor, maybe a delivery, maybe someone who had the wrong address. But the way my sister sank into the cushions like she was trying to disappear made me feel like opening that door could change everything again. When I finally reached the door, I peeked through the peephole. My entire body relaxed a little. It wasn't her husband or anyone from his family. It was Mrs. Khan from next door, holding a small grocery bag. She had probably come to return the sugar she borrowed last week. I opened the door just enough to speak with her, hoping my sister wouldn't be visible from inside. She smiled, unaware of the storm happening behind me, and handed me the bag. She asked something casual about the weather, but I could barely hear her. My mind was still back on the couch with my sister's trembling hands and the way she practically melted into silence. I thanked her quickly and closed the door with a shaky sigh of relief. When I turned around, my sister was standing now, her hands clenched together. "Who was it?" she whispered. "Just the neighbor," I said softly. "You're okay. No one followed you." She nodded, but I could see she didn't fully believe it. Fear doesn't leave that fast. It sticks to people who've carried it for too long. She sat again, pulling her knees up like she needed to feel smaller, safer. I took a deep breath and sat across from her. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I asked gently. I didn't push her. I just wanted her to know I was ready to listen. She stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "It didn't start all at once," she said. "At first it was just comments, little things." Her voice was steady but fragile. They would complain about the way I cooked, or say I wasn't respectful enough, or that I didn't understand their traditions. I tried to adjust. I really did. She paused and looked at me as if searching for judgment. I made sure my expression was soft, calm. She needed safety, not pressure. She continued, "His mother didn't like that I worked. She said I should stay home, that a wife's place is in the house. But when I did stay home for a few days, she said I was lazy. When I went to work, she said I was trying to run away from responsibilities." She let out a bitter laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Nothing I did was right. I remembered the early days of her marriage. She had been so hopeful, so excited. She spoke about her husband with a softness in her voice, talking about how patient and understanding he was. She always praised his kindness. It was painful now to see how much of that light had faded. "What about him?" I asked carefully. "Did he ever say anything?" She hesitated. "He tried," she said. "At first. He would tell them to give me time, to let me settle in. But over time, he stopped." Her voice dropped. It was easier for him to stay quiet and avoid arguments. I didn't want to react too strongly, but anger rose in my chest. How could anyone watch the person they promised to protect struggle like this and not step in? But I held back my frustration. This wasn't the moment for my anger. This was about her pain. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know how they are. They care so much about what people say, about reputation. They would blame me for everything. If the food was late, if someone didn't like something, if there was noise in the house, anything. They said I brought bad luck, or that I wasn't trying hard enough." Her eyes softened with sadness. I started believing them. My heart broke a little hearing that. I remembered how confident she used to be. She had dreams, plans, goals. She wanted to open her own small business one day. She wanted freedom. She wanted respect. And somewhere along the line, she had lost pieces of herself, piece by piece, until she didn't trust her own worth anymore. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. "Sometimes," she whispered, "I would lock myself in the bathroom just so I could breathe for a few minutes. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to cry in front of them. I didn't want to give them another reason to call me dramatic or sensitive." She looked at me, her eyes shining. "I kept thinking it would get better. Everyone has problems at the beginning of marriage, right? But it didn't get better. It only got worse. I nodded slowly, encouraging her to go on. She wiped her neck nervously. Yesterday, she stopped. Her voice thinned. Yesterday was the final push. I realized I couldn't stay anymore. I packed what I could and left before dawn. I didn't even take all my things. I just ran. My chest tightened again. She said it so calmly, but I could hear the fear underneath her words. The kind of fear that doesn't disappear even after you escape. What are you planning to do now? I asked softly. She shook her head. I don't know. I'm scared to go back. I'm scared to stay away. I don't know what he'll say. I don't know what his family will do. I don't want to go back today. You're not going anywhere, I said firmly. You're staying here as long as you need. Her eyes filled again, but this time with something slightly different. Maybe relief, maybe gratitude, maybe both. She nodded, whispering a quiet thank you. For a moment, the room was silent again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was full of unspoken fears, unanswered questions, and a heavy sense of danger still hanging in the air. Even with the door locked and the lights dim, it felt like something could still go wrong. Then my sister looked up suddenly, her expression troubled. I don't think they'll let me go that easily, she murmured. I know how they think. They're going to want answers. They're going to want control. She rubbed her palms nervously. And you know how people talk. They're probably already calling everyone they know. I exhaled sharply. She was right. Her husband's family cared deeply about appearances. The idea of their daughter-in-law suddenly leaving the house. They wouldn't handle that quietly. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. My sister's eyes flew to it. She didn't speak, but the fear on her face was unmistakable. I picked it up slowly. It was an unknown number. And it was calling. The phone kept buzzing in my hand, the vibration soft but strangely loud in the tense living room. My sister stared at it like the screen itself was dangerous. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the number flash, watched the call continue, and felt the air in the room grow tight again. Finally, I pressed decline and set the phone face down on the table. My sister let out a breath she had been holding, but she was still pale, still shaking slightly. You think it's them? She whispered. I don't know, I said honestly. But even if it is, they can't reach you here. You're safe. I said it confidently, but inside I felt the weight of uncertainty. When people care too much about control and reputation, they don't stop easily. I had seen enough situations like this to know the tension was far from over. She didn't respond. She just wrapped her arms around herself again as though she was trying to stay warm, even though the room wasn't cold. I could tell her mind was still trapped back in that house. Every memory, every harsh moment looping and replaying. I tried to shift the room's atmosphere at least a little. Are you hungry? I asked. You barely touched the water. She hesitated, then shook her head. I'm okay. I can't think about food right now. Her voice trembled at the edges, and I realized she hadn't eaten properly in days. But I didn't push her. People in emotional shock don't need pressure. They need time. I sat on the chair across from her. You can talk whenever you're ready, I said softly. Or rest. Or sit quietly. Whatever feels safe for you. She nodded, looking at the floor, her eyes distant. Then she spoke again, almost in a whisper. I keep wondering what I did wrong. I keep thinking, maybe if I tried harder or stayed more patient, things wouldn't have gotten so bad. I leaned forward. None of this is your fault. She looked up at me slowly, like she wanted to believe those words but couldn't accept them yet. You didn't live in that house, she said. Every day felt like I was balancing on something thin. If I breathed wrong, someone would get upset. If I spoke up, they called me disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, they said I was being rude. She rubbed her temples, exhausted. His mother would wake me at dawn for chores, even on days when I worked late. If I said I was tired, she'd say I was weak or ungrateful. And if I didn't wake up on time, everyone would act like I had done something unforgivable. I clenched my jaw but stayed calm for her sake. This was the part she needed to release, the part she had probably kept buried for months. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked gently. She sighed. Because I kept thinking it would get better. And I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to admit that the life I dreamed of was turning into something else. That last part hit hard. I remembered her wedding preparations. The way she used to smile when she tried on outfits, how she talked about a fresh start, new beginnings, building a home. She had walked into that marriage with hope, not knowing she was stepping into a place where she would feel judged for simply existing. How was he during all this? I asked carefully. She hesitated. He wasn't bad to me, she said. Not at the beginning. He used to stand up for me. He really tried. But his family, they're loud, they're stubborn, they're very set in their ways. Over time he got tired of arguing with them. He stopped defending me. He would tell me to adjust, to compromise, to let things go. But I felt like I was shrinking a little every day. She took a breath that shook. He started avoiding me after a while. Not in a hateful way, just in a distant way. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't see how unhappy I'd become. He didn't see anything. I listened, letting her speak freely. She had kept her feelings trapped for too long, and now they were pouring out in fragments, each one revealing more of the emotional pressure she had been under. Last week, she continued softly, I tried to talk to him. I tried explaining how I felt, how the environment was affecting me. He said he understood, but he asked me to give it more time. He said every new bride struggles. But my struggle wasn't normal. My fear wasn't normal. She looked down at her hands again. I felt invisible in that house. I felt like nothing I did had value. And yesterday, something inside me just broke. Her voice went quiet, almost hollow. I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. This time, she held onto my hand like it was the first solid thing she'd felt in days. You're safe here, I repeated. And you don't have to go back until you're ready. Her eyes softened but didn't lose the fear. Do you think they'll come here? She asked. I exhaled slowly. They might try calling. They might ask around. But they won't dare show up at the house right away. They don't want questions from neighbors. She nodded weakly, but I could tell the worry still gnawed at her. She knew them better than I did. She knew what they were capable of, emotionally, mentally, socially. People who care more about image than humanity can become unpredictable when they feel threatened. Just then my phone buzzed again. But this time it wasn't a call, it was a message. Unknown number, we need to talk. It's important. My sister inhaled sharply, her eyes glued to the screen even though she couldn't see it. Another message followed. Unknown number, we know she's with you. My heartbeat quickened. My sister's lips parted slightly, her breath turning shallow. Please, she said quietly. Don't answer them. I won't, I assured her, locking my phone and placing it away. But inside, a new worry began to form. If they already knew she was with me, how quickly had they started asking around? Who told them? And more importantly, what were they planning next? I stood and closed the curtains, making sure no one could see inside. The outside world suddenly felt heavier, darker, closer than before. My sister watched me carefully, her shoulders tense, as though every movement in the room meant something new. She whispered, they don't like when they lose control. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about her leaving the house. This was about pride, power, and the kind of people who refuse to accept anything that challenges their authority. The room grew quiet again, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence right before something shifts. She pulled her knees closer, voice barely above a whisper. If they can't reach me, they might try reaching you. I felt the weight of her words settle into the room like a shadow. Because deep down we both knew. This wasn't over. The rest of the evening felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was warning us that something was coming. My sister stayed close, barely speaking, her eyes drifting toward the door every few minutes as if she expected it to open on its own. I kept checking my phone even though I told myself I wouldn't respond. More messages came from the unknown number, each one short, each one colder than the last. Pick up the phone. We need to talk. This won't end well if you keep ignoring us. I didn't show her the newest ones. She was already trying so hard not to break down. Adding more fear wouldn't help. For a while, I tried distracting her. Light conversations, soft music, the TV on in the background, but nothing truly reached her. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. You could see it in the way she held her shoulders up, tight and stiff, like she was still listening for footsteps in that old hallway of the home she left. As night settled deeper, she finally asked quietly, do you think they'll try coming here tonight? I paused before answering. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to scare her either. I think they'll call a few more times first, I said gently. They care too much about what others will say. Showing up here immediately will raise questions. She nodded slowly, but her fingers tapped anxiously against her leg. You don't understand, they don't like losing control. They don't like when someone steps away from them. I understand enough, I replied softly. She looked at me, eyes full of fear, but behind the fear there was something deeper. Exhaustion mixed with a small, fading hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. But peace wasn't coming yet. Around 10 p.m. my phone buzzed again. I ignored it at first, assuming it was another message. But the buzzing didn't stop. It was a call. Then another. Then another. 5 calls in a row, all from the same unknown number. My sister covered her ears, whispering, "Please make it stop." The sound didn't just scare her, it brought back everything she had been trying to escape since arriving. I turned the phone off completely and placed it upside down. "They're not getting to you. Not tonight." She nodded, swallowing hard, but her shoulders didn't relax. Not even for a second. A little later someone knocked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it came without warning, and the sound felt like a crack of thunder inside the silent room. My sister's whole body jolted. She grabbed my wrist with a panic I had never seen from her before. "Don't open it," she breathed. Her voice wasn't just scared, it was terrified. I motioned for her to stay behind the couch while I moved closer to the door. My heart was beating fast enough that I felt it in my throat. I stared through the peephole, expecting to see someone from her husband's family. But instead, I saw a man I didn't recognize standing outside, his hands tucked in his pockets. He looked calm, too calm for someone who accidentally knocked on the wrong door. I didn't open it. He stood there for a while, looking around the hallway as if waiting for something, or someone. Then he knocked again, this time a little firmer. My sister shook her head over and over. "Don't answer. Don't answer," she whispered like a chant. I waited in complete silence until the man finally stepped back and walked away. But he didn't leave the building immediately. I watched through the peephole and saw him stop near the staircase, pulling out his phone. My chest tightened. Whoever he wasn't here by accident. I backed away and whispered, "I don't think that was a random visitor." My sister closed her eyes and let out a shaky exhale. "They must have sent him," she said. "They don't always come themselves. Sometimes they ask others to check first." Her voice thinned again. "That's how they keep distance, so they don't look responsible." I suddenly felt a deeper layer of danger pressing into the room. This wasn't just stubborn in-laws worried about reputation. This was something more coordinated, more planned. "Did they ever threaten you?" I asked carefully. She hesitated for a long time. "Not directly," she said finally. "But they would say things like, 'No one leaves this family,' or, 'We fix our problems privately.' They would talk in coded ways. Not loud, not dramatic, just cold." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. She continued softly, "And once, his mother said I should remember that the family protects its own before outsiders. She said if anything ever came out, they would make sure the story went in their favor. She said I wouldn't want people to misunderstand what really happens in a household." I stared at her. "They said that to you?" She nodded, her eyes welling up. "Many times." I felt anger tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice steady for her. "You're not going back there." She wiped her cheek. "I'm scared. I don't know what they'll do. I don't know what he'll do." Her words were trembling, broken, and honest. She wasn't just afraid of confrontation, she was afraid of the pressure, the manipulation, the emotional hold they had built around her. Another knock echoed suddenly. This time harder. We both jumped. I quickly checked the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was the same man from before, only now he wasn't alone. 2 more people stood behind him. They weren't shouting, but they looked determined, like they were here with a purpose and wouldn't leave without getting something. My sister pressed her hand against her mouth, eyes wide in panic. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't let them in." I didn't move. I stood completely still, barely breathing. The man knocked again, slower this time. More intentional. I didn't answer. A moment of silence passed, and then I heard him say through the door calmly, "We know she's inside." My sister gasped softly, her body trembling uncontrollably. She shook her head no, silently pleading. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding heavily. I reached for the lights, turning them all off until the room was swallowed in dim shadows, hoping they would think no one was home. But another knock came. Then another. Firm, steady, patient. They weren't leaving. My sister clutched my arm. Her voice cracked, barely audible. "They won't go until they get what they want." The knocking stopped. Then, through the silence, we heard footsteps walking closer to the door again. Someone leaned in. And a voice, low, steady, too calm, spoke through the wood. "Open the door. We need to talk." My sister's breath hitched. Because this time, it wasn't a stranger's voice. It was her husband's. And he wasn't alone. My sister's breath stopped the moment she heard his voice through the door. It wasn't loud or angry, it was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that hides the real storm underneath. She backed up until her shoulders hit the wall, her hands trembling so hard she had to clasp them together just to keep still. I stayed frozen near the light switch, staring at the door like it was something alive. The air felt thick, heavy, like every sound in the hallway was pushing its way into our living room. He knocked again, once, slowly, as if he already knew we were standing right there on the other side. "Please open the door," he said. "I just want to talk." But nothing about his voice sounded harmless. It wasn't the tone of someone worried or confused. It was the tone of someone who had come with a plan. My sister shook her head repeatedly, tears forming in her eyes. "He never comes like this," she whispered. "Never." Her voice cracked. "If he's here, it means they pushed him to come." I didn't speak. I didn't trust myself to say anything calm. I just watched the fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that came from months of pressure, control, and emotional exhaustion. Outside, I heard a faint murmur, someone whispering to him. Probably one of the men who came earlier. A moment later he spoke again, his tone slightly sharper. "I know you're both in there. We just need to settle this." Settle this. The words ran through my mind like cold water. My sister covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "He promised he wouldn't involve them," she said softly. "He promised me that if things ever got bad he would talk to me alone. He promised he wouldn't let this turn into a family issue." Then she let out a small, broken laugh. But his promises were only real when they were easy for him. Another knock, louder this time. "Please," he said, "stop hiding." I stepped back from the door. "We're not opening it," I whispered. "Not tonight." She nodded quickly, relief washing over her, but only for a moment. Because then we both heard something none of us expected. A phone ringing, not mine, not hers, but from outside the door. I could hear her husband answer it immediately, his voice dropping even lower. "Yes, I'm here," he said. He paused. "What?" "No, she's not answering." Another pause. "I'm staying until she does. I'm not leaving without her." My sister sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The sound of his voice, the certainty in it, the determination, it overwhelmed her. She pressed her forehead to her knees and whispered, "They've involved more people. Someone else is part of this." I lowered myself down beside her. "We're going to get through this," I said. "But you need to tell me everything now. The full story. No holding back." She swallowed, her eyes red. "There's something I didn't tell you earlier." She hesitated, looking toward the door as if afraid the walls themselves had ears. "Before I left yesterday, his family wasn't just arguing with me. They were planning to talk to people in my workplace." I stared at her. "Why?" "To ruin my reputation," she whispered. "To make it look like I was the problem, that I was irresponsible, unstable, anything that would make me lose my job. They said if I didn't listen to them, they'd make sure I wouldn't have anywhere to go. No independence. No way to support myself." I felt a cold anger rise deep inside me. Not loud anger, cold, controlled, quiet. The kind that makes your heartbeat slow down instead of speeding up. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" I asked. "Because I didn't know if they actually did it," she admitted. "And I didn't want to ruin your peace. I didn't want to drag you into something messy." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "But yesterday, I overheard them making a call. They were discussing contacting someone at my office. Someone with influence. I didn't hear the whole thing, but I heard enough to know they weren't bluffing anymore." A chill crawled down my spine. "So they were planning to cut you off from everyone?" "Yes," she whispered. "And then they would bring me back home so I'd have no choice but to stay quiet." Before I could respond, his voice came again from the hallway, sharper this time, frustrated. "Why are you doing this?" he said loudly. "Just open the door. We can fix this before it gets worse." My sister flinched. And then it happened, the second twist, the thing that shifted the entire situation into something bigger, something deeper. A loud noise echoed through the hallway. Not from him. From downstairs. A sudden shout, followed by hurried footsteps running up the staircase. Someone else was coming. My sister grabbed my arm. "Who is that?" I didn't answer because I didn't know. The footsteps were fast, heavy, determined. Whoever it was reached our floor quickly, and then a voice called out, not calm, not angry, just urgent. "Step away from the door." It wasn't directed at us. It was directed at her husband. I moved closer to the peephole and looked out again. 2 more people had arrived. Not family. Not friends. 2 unfamiliar men standing at the end of the hallway, looking straight at her husband. Their expressions weren't aggressive, but they were firm, serious, like they had come with a purpose of their own. My sister's husband took a step back, confused. "Who are you?" he asked. The taller man didn't answer. He just said, "We need to talk to her." "Not you." My heart dropped. "Talk to her?" My sister heard it too and her face went pale. "How do they even know me?" she whispered. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that whatever this was, it was bigger than family pressure or reputation concerns. The shorter man stepped forward. "Tell her we're here to help," he said. "She'll understand." My sister shook her head violently. "I don't understand," she cried in a whisper. "I don't know them. I've never seen them." But the tone of their voice, the certainty, the confidence, it didn't feel random. It didn't feel like they came because of her husband's family. They came for another reason. A reason she hadn't told me yet. A reason she might not even know herself. Outside, her husband raised his voice. "You can't talk to her. This is a private matter." But the taller man cut him off. "Not anymore." My sister's eyes widened. She looked at me with pure terror and whispered, "There's something else happening." And I knew she was right. Because the night had shifted again. And now, we weren't just hiding from her husband's family. Someone else wanted her. Someone who knew exactly where to find her. And for the first time since she arrived, I didn't know who the real danger was anymore. When I stepped into that cold, echoing hallway of the police station, my heart felt heavier than it had the entire week. I thought I was ready for whatever truth waited for us, but I was wrong. The moment the officer walked toward us with that serious expression, I felt my stomach drop. My younger sister tightened her grip on my arm like she was bracing for impact. For a second, I wondered if we would hear something that would change everything again. And we did. The officer led us into a small room, the kind that always smelled faintly of dust and old files. He asked us to sit, and the silence that followed made my chest tighten. He started by explaining that they had visited her in-laws' home earlier that morning. I could tell he was choosing his words carefully, avoiding anything that might sound too harsh. He explained that the family denied everything, pretending they didn't know why she had left. They acted confused, talking about misunderstandings, claiming she was too emotional, and that they never intended any harm. Hearing that made my sister clench her jaw. I could feel a mixture of anger and fear rolling off her. But then the officer paused, leaned back and said there was something else, something unexpected. Someone else had come to the station earlier before we arrived. Someone from her husband's side of the family, but not the person we had been focusing on. Her husband's cousin had shown up, insisting he needed to speak to the police privately. The officer said the cousin looked nervous and kept glancing at the door, like he thought someone might follow him. He didn't give many details yet, just said he felt unsafe and wanted to tell the truth before things got worse. My sister's breath caught. She whispered her cousin-in-law's name under her breath, as if she couldn't believe he would get involved. I remembered him faintly, a quiet man who always kept to himself during family gatherings. If he had gone to the police, it meant whatever was happening in that house was bigger than we imagined. Something deeper. Something hidden. Something the whole family wasn't willing to admit. The officer told us that the cousin revealed there had been growing tension within the household for months. Not just toward my sister but within the family itself. Arguments, jealousy, financial stress. He hinted that someone had been influencing the others, pushing them to act out of fear and pressure. He didn't go into details yet, but he made it clear that the truth wasn't as simple as blaming one or two people. It was layered, complicated, and far from over. My sister's hands trembled. She looked smaller, like the weight of everything was finally pressing down all at once. I placed my hand over hers, trying to remind her she wasn't alone. But inside me something else was building, a mix of worry and determination. I knew this wasn't just about the past anymore. Whatever the cousin told the police had created a new direction for the investigation, and now we were part of it whether we liked it or not. The officer said they needed us to return later that afternoon to give an official joint statement. He also suggested that my sister stay somewhere safe for now. Hearing that made everything feel even more real. Safe? From who exactly? And why now, after everything? We walked out of the station into the afternoon light that felt too bright for the heaviness in our hearts. My sister kept looking around as if expecting someone to be watching us. I tried to reassure her, but even I felt a strange pressure in the air. Something was shifting, something we hadn't prepared for. On the drive back home she finally spoke. Her voice was low, tired. She said she had always felt like someone in the house was pushing the others against her. Not directly, not openly, but subtly. She didn't know who, but she felt like someone had a strange influence, whispering things behind closed doors, creating a divide. She never had proof, but the tension never made sense unless someone was stirring it. I asked her if she suspected the same cousin who went to the police. She shook her head quickly. She said he was one of the only people who ever treated her with kindness, someone who looked uncomfortable whenever arguments broke out. If anything, she believed he must have finally snapped under pressure and decided to speak up. Hearing that made my thoughts spin. If he wasn't the one causing trouble, then who was? And why would any of them want to hide behind him now? We reached home and closed the door behind us, but neither of us felt relaxed. The house felt too quiet, and the silence only made my mind race faster. I made some tea even though neither of us were in the mood for it. She kept pacing the living room, stopping only to glance out the window like she expected something, or someone, to appear. Hours passed slowly, each minute feeling longer than the last. And then something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number. When I answered, the voice on the other end didn't introduce themselves. They didn't even ask who I was. They simply said one line that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Be careful who you trust. Not everyone is telling the truth. Before I could respond, the call ended. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My sister watched my expression shift and rushed over, asking what happened. I didn't want to scare her, but I couldn't lie either. When I repeated the words to her, she froze. Her eyes filled with fear but also something else, recognition. She left the room without saying a word. When she returned, she was holding her old phone. She told me she had been receiving messages for weeks, strange ones, from an unknown number. Messages hinting at secrets in the house, telling her to leave before things got worse, warning her that someone she trusted wasn't who they pretended to be. She never told me because she didn't want to worry anyone. She thought maybe it was a prank or someone just trying to scare her. But now, hearing that voice on my phone, everything felt connected. We sat there in silence, realizing that the situation was more dangerous and more twisted than we thought. Someone was watching. Someone knew what was happening behind those closed doors. And someone didn't want the truth to come out. The day that began with fear had now shifted into full uncertainty. Every new piece of information only deepened the mystery. And as night settled in, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever was waiting for us at the police station the next day wasn't just about giving a statement. It was about uncovering a truth that someone was desperate to hide. A truth that could change everything. The next morning felt different, like the air was holding its breath. My sister barely slept, and honestly neither did I. We got ready quietly, both of us lost in our own thoughts as we prepared to return to the police station. The unknown caller's warning stayed with me all night, replaying in my mind like a stuck echo. My sister kept checking her old phone, scrolling through those strange messages she had ignored for weeks. Now, every sentence felt heavier, like they were pieces of a puzzle we had overlooked. When we arrived at the station, the officer from yesterday greeted us with a nod and asked us to follow him to the same small room again. But this time the atmosphere felt even more serious. He closed the door behind us before sitting down. My sister held her breath, waiting for whatever news he had uncovered. He began by telling us that the cousin who came forward had given a much more detailed statement late last night. He admitted that someone inside the family had been manipulating everyone, turning arguments into battles and disagreements into chaos. The cousin said it wasn't just about household tension. There had been jealousy brewing for months, jealousy rooted in old family issues, past grudges, and pressure that had slowly twisted into something unhealthy. According to him, someone had convinced the rest of the family that my sister was a threat to their unity, that she was trying to cause division. None of it was true, but the constant whispering, the constant fueling of suspicion, made the environment dark and suffocating. My sister listened silently, her hands clasped tightly. She asked the officer who that person was. The officer sighed, choosing his words carefully. He said they had a strong idea, and they had even brought the person in for questioning. But before he could reveal the name, he said there was something else we needed to know. They had tracked the unknown number that contacted me. The call came from a prepaid phone purchased in a nearby town 2 days earlier. The same type of phone used to send the anonymous messages to my sister. What surprised us most was that the person who bought that phone wasn't anyone from her husband's immediate family. It was a neighbor who lived close to the in-laws' house. A woman who had been noticing things for months, the arguments, the loud tension, the doors slamming at strange hours. She was the one trying to warn my sister anonymously, afraid of getting directly involved but hoping her messages would push my sister to leave the unhealthy situation. Hearing that left both of us stunned. My sister had always felt like there were silent eyes watching her pain, but she never imagined someone from outside the family would care enough to send warnings. The officer said they had spoken to the neighbor, and she admitted she had tried reaching out quietly because she didn't want trouble with the family. She feared things could escalate and wanted to help in the only way she felt safe. My sister's eyes softened at that. It was strange how a stranger had seen her clearly when the people who were supposed to support her didn't. Then, finally, the officer revealed the name of the person responsible for creating all the tension. It was her sister-in-law. The one who always smiled politely but kept her distance. The one who seemed harmless. The cousin had explained that she had been holding on to resentment for years, feeling overshadowed, feeling like her opinions didn't matter in the house. When my sister married into the family, she felt threatened, like someone else was getting attention or respect she believed she deserved. Instead of speaking honestly, she started twisting conversations, adding small lies here and there. She never openly encouraged conflict, but she planted seeds, dropped hints, and watched the family unravel slowly. It began with small remarks and grew into something that affected everyone, including my sister. It was a cycle she didn't know how to stop, so she kept feeding it, hiding behind the family's trust. My sister sat there silently, trying to process the truth. She whispered that she had always sensed something was off with her sister-in-law but never imagined it went this far. The officer told us that the family was cooperating now and wanted to resolve things in a lawful and peaceful way. They understood the severity of the situation, especially after speaking to the cousin and the neighbor. Steps were being taken to ensure accountability without escalating the matter further. When we left the station, my sister didn't say much. She looked lighter somehow, even though the truth was painful. I asked how she was feeling and she said she felt relieved, not because everything was solved instantly, but because she finally understood what had been happening behind those walls. She said the not knowing had been the hardest part. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to move toward closure. The investigation continued, handled carefully to avoid unnecessary harm. The family reached out several times wanting to apologize and explain, but my sister chose to take things slowly. She needed time to heal, time to rebuild her confidence, time to breathe without feeling watched. She stayed with me during that period, focusing on herself for the first time in a long while. One afternoon, she received a message from the cousin who had spoken up. He apologized for not stepping in sooner. He said he had seen things happening but felt helpless at the time. My sister thanked him, telling him his honesty changed everything. He said he hoped she would find peace, whether she chose to return or move forward separately. His message felt genuine, and my sister appreciated the sincerity. The neighbor who sent the anonymous messages never came forward personally, but the police confirmed she was relieved to know my sister was safe. My sister asked if she could thank her someday, but the officer said it was better to protect her privacy. Still, knowing someone cared enough to speak up gave my sister a strange sense of comfort. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. The fear faded. The tension loosened. My sister started planning her future, one shaped by her choices instead of someone else's influence. She wasn't sure what direction she would take, but she knew it would be a healthier one. One evening we sat together on the balcony as the sun dipped low. She looked peaceful, almost glowing in the warm light. She told me something that stayed with me. She said, "Sometimes the people who hurt you aren't the ones who raise their voices. Sometimes they're the ones who stay quiet while steering everything from behind. But the moment you understand the truth, you finally get your power back." I looked at her, seeing strength where there had once been fear. She wasn't completely healed. Healing takes time, but she was no longer broken. She was growing, rebuilding, becoming herself again. In the end, the whole experience taught both of us that truth has a way of coming to the surface, even when people try to bury it. And sometimes, the most unexpected people, like a quiet cousin or a concerned neighbor, become the reason the truth finally rises. As life slowly settled, my sister moved forward with clarity, choosing a path that honored her peace and well-being. The conflict had ended, but the lessons stayed. She learned to trust her instincts, to protect her heart, and to walk away when staying meant losing herself. And just like that, the story that began with fear ended with strength, healing, and a reminder that even in the darkest situations, there are always signs guiding you out. You just have to listen.